Hey everybody, welcome to another Sunday Live chat. I'm here in the Subcon studios today to give you the official story, and I'm just getting myself set up here. That makes me run through a number of juggles. But today, again, we're doing the story of Mind TPI, Mind, the Perpetual Intercourse. You know, I can actually get in trouble for saying the title of this album or possibly showing it when I announced the live stream on Patreon. It actually I originally said the story of Mind, the Perpetual Intercourse, and it said we have to give you a warning on that. And I thought, like, that's really strange. However, remember that this was the time of what they called the PMRC, the Parents Music Resource Center. I think it was one run by Tipper Gore or someone of that nature. But I think this was very early on their attack list. Yes, this album came out in September 1986. And at that time, there was a very conservative kind of like time period in some ways. And so the album was ripe for many things. I love the jacket, just how plain and simple it is. There's just not even any song credits on there, and it looks like the bottom of the ocean, or it could be Mars. And of course, Stephen has explained that the cover, provocative, shot in New York City off a TV screen, and then manipulated into the cover image. The CD, of course, has a different cover image, just slightly varied in the color variations. And again, no credits, but credits on the inside. So on the last episode, shall we say, at the end of the Bites story, we were on tour, I believe, with Bill Lieb, and we had finished our tour, and we were asked to do one more show, and that was in Edmonton, Alberta, and this would have been in December of 1985. Now, could correct me and say January 86, but it's one of those two. And we headed up there to a festival. Bill Lieb, myself, Ogre, and we did a show there that was part of a festival. And Dwayne played the festival with Mandy in a band called Water. I happened to step out and check out his set because it was a one-man band, and saw what he was doing and thought, like, wow, this guy's on it. So nevertheless, we returned back to Vancouver, and it was time to sort of like figure out what was next. And the first thing that Bill Lieb said to me, as I know he had it was a pretty rough time touring. It was one of the most difficult tours we ever did, kind of like all shoved in a truck, a truck that you move in, with a wall built in it and a couch, as we called it, Chesterfield, thrown in the back. A small little wood plank above it that someone could crawl up there, mostly if you were sick, but no heating, and basically in wintertime. So Bill came back, and the first thing he said to me was, when we were thinking about undertaking an even bigger tour for 1986, was I don't want to tour. He met somebody that was very special to him, and he wanted to stay. And he also was kind of like idealistic in the sense that he was picking up really quickly on the equipment. And I believe I also can sort of think at the same time I kind of skipped ahead, because I know we made the Tear Garden EP just before Mind TPI, and I will go back to that on an episode, and I'm going to consolidate the Tear Garden story a little bit. So one of the last things that I did with Bill in my apartment studio was the Tear Garden song, where I asked him to play the bass line like this: boom, 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 boom. And from that point on, it set Bill into forward motion with his Porta Studio, and I think the week later he came and played me a song where it was pretty much the Tear Garden song written again, but it was something he'd done on his own. So I was like, super cool, he's on it. And from that point on, Bill started making Frontline Assembly records, and he hasn't stopped since. However, I was lucky enough to have a friend at that moment. I said, "Do you remember that guy who opened for Skinny Puppy in the band called Water? Do you know what his name was?" And Lisa Love, this girl that I was seeing at the time, said, "Yes, that's my friend's boyfriend. So let's call him." And literally called him like right then and there in Edmonton, and said, "Dwayne, how would you like to come down and have a meeting and talk about the possibility of doing some touring?" Originally we thought touring, and then, we'll see how much further it fits in. And the story goes is that up until that point, let's touch in on where the locations are here again. It's always fun, isn't it? This would be the 1288 Broughton location, which looks the most dreary in this picture. It's in the center here. And after moving out of 1045 Harrow rather abruptly, I kind of landed on a place that was bigger than usual. It had a room where equipment could be set up properly, but nevertheless, it wasn't the most nicest of places. Forgive me for forgetting your name, who sent me this picture, but he went around and took pictures at some of the locations. Our apartment was literally at the top of these stairs, turn right and go to this little platform here, and then walk in that door. And so it was easy load in, easy load out, and quite a spacious apartment. I remember it was like 1,250 square feet or something to that effect. $600 a month, and it was a 2-bedroom. And nevertheless, I'm going into a lot of detail about this place, but in some cases, the place does help, provide, the impetus.
And here's the bathroom.
Oh, I got to show you this. This is kind of crazy. I don't know
The hell room.
how clearly you'll be able to see this, or if it digitizes, or.
And here's the bathroom.
The bathroom.
The room of hell.
Let's see here.
The hell room.
This is one of the rare shots of the actual
here's
room.
The bathroom. The room of hell.
I believe that's Lisa talking there. So this is actually showing the room where Mine TPI was written, and that is like a later rendition here of the setup, because I won't skip ahead in the history, but this is like when we are heading towards Vivisect. You can see that we've got the Atari and the S900 and the ESQ. That was a new acquisition later, so don't get that confused here. It does, however, show the MSQ 700, which is the sync box up here, which is how we originally synced things. And in fact, this room was the room where, let's say before Dwayne was called, and it looked a lot different than this, because there was a big mixing console straight in the center here where my mom's sewing machine is. However, it was moved, it was straightened out. This wasn't here yet. This is Dwayne's rack. So basically, I had written a better part of the album before Dwayne arrived. I believe there was only a few songs. When Dwayne arrived, I believe we were working on the Choke Regrip, which is already on the Dig It single. And I remember he came in and he heard it, and he just plugged his ears, and we're like, "Are you okay?" I said, "That's so loud." And I do agree, we monitored incredibly loud, and I remember it used to be pretty challenging to go in the room. So nevertheless, kind of Dwayne was confronted with this task kind of right away, to sort of like take on the idea of being in Skinny Puppy. And I can't imagine, it was like at that time he was in Edmonton, he had heard of Skinny Puppy, and he was very interested, and he was coming from a band kind of in this realm, like in a young state. Very, very cool guy. And right away I was like, oh man, this guy has the best hair I've ever seen in my life. believe it or not, this is the picture of the first day I met Dwayne. Well, the first day outside of the gig in Edmonton, where he actually traveled down to Vancouver. And I believe this is July the 15th, 1986. And I'm discussing with him right then and there, well, what do you think? And then I walk into the room that you just saw. He sees the gear, we sit down, and we do the first jam that we ever do. Now, the thing that's so cool about that is that up until then, I was kind of locked into being like the guy making all the music. And basically, when I came to play it, I didn't have free hands. So when Dwayne arrived and all of a sudden he was playing things that I thought like, wow, this is incredible. It was the first time I started picking up my other instruments, like my guitar or like the radio. I started playing the radios and playing a bunch of the other forms of gear that were around. And it's like basically gelling in one night or so after a fine Indian meal at the Sitar restaurant in Gastown, Vancouver, by the way. If it still exists, I highly recommend going and checking it out, because that it's funny, that restaurant has a lot of Skinny Puppy history steeped into it. Every album got stamped there, so go there and if you'd like to experience some stuff. So Dwayne arrived, and pretty quickly we thought like, well, we better get busy. And what's odd is if you think about it, this July 1986, and our album came out in September 1986, which I can't really figure out how it was done so quickly, and how we were already on tour in mid-September for the album Mine TPI. It seemed to be like, I mean, if you took that by today's standards, that would take like a century to basically conceive how, I mean, you can't even get an album mastered that quick anymore. And I have a funny bit of footage here. Here we're sitting, and this is in 1986 September. I'm sitting with Dave Ogilvy there, and I see Pete Rivett-Carnick back there from Severed Heads, and we've just received the brand new copies of Mine, the Perpetual Intercourse in our hands, and we are talking and looking at it for the first time. Pete, of course, played with Severed Heads on that tour. He has a band called Single Gun Theory on his own from Australia. Very fine guy. It's funny how much Rave looks like Ogre there, but I didn't remember Rave being as like dressed up, but possibly he was. That's Ogre there. This is Dwayne in the dressing room. As again, the world's greatest hair right away. We knew Dwayne was talented, but man, what a hairstyle. It's something you never forget. That guy had style and class right from the beginning. And I think that the concept of, again, I think I left it pretty firmly implemented, that Tom Ellard from Severed Heads had kind of opened the door for us creatively, in a creative way. And we were now sitting here at the very beginning of our tour that would consist of 72 shows around the world, and very life-changing, I might add, too. It changed us all. I think we all had no idea what was coming. I mean, I had never been to Europe yet, and we were about to go do a world tour. So other than these boots, I came back looking much different. I think we all did. And let's skip back to the whole concept of the album, though. I like skipped into, the whole sort of outcomes and philosophies. But the making of the album began on a quarter-inch 8-track in the studio there in that apartment. And so I'd make a better part of it, and then we'd go into Mushroom Studios and transfer what had been made there onto 2-inch tape, and then begin the procedure there. I don't know how I want to approach this the best way, whether I go song by song or whatever, but perhaps I should first of all talk about the cover again. The cover, Stephen Gilmore, I'm hinting at the idea all the time that Stephen is going to come on and explain things, but if you're familiar with Stephen's posts lately, you'll see that that could be an imminent possibility, wink wink. Steven is known to release versions and prints of the artwork that are fabulous and highly collectible as well, so they sell out very quick. Emanating from the Mine TPI album came a couple of singles. Whether you want to call it Chainsaw or whether you want to call it Stairs and Flowers, they were both came out. I believe the difference was one came out in the US as Stairs and Flowers and one came out in Canada as Chainsaw, and all of it had a parental advisory explicit content on it. Yes, it probably covered that nipple. And let's look at here. So Dwayne's credited on track A3, A5. That would be Three Blind Mice, Stairs and Flowers, Antagonism, and Burnt with Water. Unfortunately, I think they made a mistake on Three Blind Mice. It's been kind of clarified here on Patreon before. Believe it or not, that's the earliest creation of the new Mine TPI, and was the beginning of the association with the whole new setup of a TR-707 and a 727 drum machine. In the case of Three Blind Mice, that was supplemented with live drums. And so I think that was one of the last times that live drums was kind of associated into the situation after stuff like The Basement on Last Call. They wouldn't be... We do metallic percussion, but not so much just pure live drums. The 707 and 727 hadn't made its full-on staple yet. It's about to, along with our other gear. Let's call this the baseline of Skinny Puppy equipment. Of course, the Multi-Moog. The first synth acquired. Mine's in better shape than that. A lot of the sounds you guys ask me about are made on this because of the cross-modulation possibilities and all the goodies. This is something that I hadn't really talked about before, but this delay was also heavily used on a lot of our stuff. I believe it's an Ibanez. I can't remember the exact model number, but you can recognize it here. Maybe you guys with amazing vision can see that. I can't see it. Anyways, this delay was used a lot on the musical aspect of stuff, some of the swirling, more sort of like modulated delay stuff. It was very cheap, and it probably still is. This delay was also utilized, again an Ibanez delay, this one the DM1000. This one had a hold button, so this was also utilized for a lot of like the sort of like noisy backgrounds and things that you could hear pitching. So pitching, how you would pitch it is that you could take the time and you could basically scroll through the time. You could modulate. This one, yeah, this is a LFO here, feedback, the delay time here. It was a fabulously cheap delay. When I played live, if you watch Ain't It Dead Yet, I'm running my guitar through this. Of course, here's the legendary 727. I mean, I think you can still get this drum machine for like $150 or something. It's really just a percussion device, but a lot of the songs, including, as we were just talking about there, Three Blind Mice, heavily features, the whole album really features the percussion of the 727. So many people have asked what samples in this case, and we weren't really using percussion samples so much back then. Of course, we ran everything through the PCM41, and when we tracked it, to give it that alienation. Another shot of the Multi-Moog. The Metal Driver was a pedal that was the first distortion pedal we used to use a lot on a lot of the things that we distorted. Back to the Multi-Moog again for its fantastic modulation section. You'll see there all the modulation possibilities here within the modulation and the touch section. Sorry to jump around here. Hey, what would Skinny Puppy be without a Pro 1? I was listening to the album today and thinking I'll try and trigger some memories, and the most predominant memory of the entire album is obviously the star of the show is the Pro One. The Pro One's always been the staple of Skinny Puppy music. So if I start at one time, one place, that sequence you hear is created by a Pro One, and it's been discussed pretty heavily amongst people with questions. Eric and Omar from the Subcon Orchestra had a challenge where I believe they were trying to emulate the exact sound, and they went through a procedure. I'm not sure if we posted this, but we should post this, Omar and Eric. We should put it together. It was so close that I thought, like, wow, you know, I wondered at some points, how could the Pro One sound that good? Well, it does require some work, but that sequence is like the driving force of the song, one time, one place, and especially God's gift. As again, Three Blind Mice. I can stop there with the Pro One sort of heavy influence and say that all of those all featured the 707 with the 727, and then basically this is the sampler. This was our sampler. We used this Korg SDD1000 delay to sample all of the strange sounds, or all of the sounds other than any other drum sound you heard. So what you would do is you put this switch here up to sampling. We're down here in record sync. You put this up to sampling. You select one of these 2 times in yellow, and that tells you that you're in this recording ability time that goes from between, I think, 1 second to 2.5 seconds. From here, you can adjust it down to half a second or to 1 second, or from 1 second to 2.5 seconds. So you'd hit this button here, the standby button, and as soon as it gets audio, it will capture that long of a loop, and then in the back, it would be triggered by the drum machine, and I had 2 of these. So basically, all the sounds, and I think mostly displayed, most predominantly in 200 years. You'll always wonder, what's those sounds that are going, claw, claw, and all that sort of stuff. I'm sure you love my vocal rendition, Scully. The samples were a lot of times made by my mouth. So Tom Mellard said at one point, make samples with your mouth. And so we did. The advent of sampling also advanced quickly. And the Ensoniq Mirage was like the future for people that didn't want to spend like a new car's worth of money to have a sampler. And basically, I had a Mirage, and I used just the stock discs that came with it. And the first sample that I ever took is present on Stairs and Flowers. It's that sort of melodic section that goes, it sounds like a piano section, and in fact, that is the first sample that I ever took. And I had done all of these things before Dwayne came along, and when Dwayne came into the room, Dwayne understood the Mirage like an alien. Right away, I didn't even realize that there was a sequencer in the Mirage, or I didn't realize all the other potential elements. And Dwayne went in right away, and we quickly started doing things. So the very first thing I said to him was, by the way, we also had a Roland Juno 1. Also, people ask, what are the other sounds? Sounds like there's some strings, some other things on there that aren't Mirage samples. Yes, it was always complemented with some sort of offset on this synth. Again, another cheap synth. It's not something that we hung out with for some reason. I don't know. That's one of the one things that was disappeared. Touching quickly back on the distortion, I touched earlier on the metal driver pedal. The heavy metal pedal was also heavily used on stuff like Yo-Yo Scrape or some of the more heavier parts of Dig It. I'm going to get into Dig It in a second, but Dig It was essentially not the 707 and not the 727. It was actually written on a TR-808, and it was accompanied with this baby, the Roland TR-606, which I believe on that particular day when I went to the studio to track it, I had hooked it up somehow incorrectly. And those sort of like destructing parts in Dig It that you hear, where it goes brrrt, 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 brrrt. That was just me simply turning on the 606 as it was synced to a running TR-808. So I figured, okay, that's not happy. However, it did get tracked that way. So as they say, always track. You get those happy accidents. Thanks to Mr. TR-606, the 808 was mistriggered, and thus you end up with those beautiful anomalies. But again, everything was triggering the STD-1000 delay with samples in it, or two, and run through the heavy metal or the metal driver pedal, and then the PCM41, and then somehow tracked. When I listened to Dig It today, I was kind of like really interested. There was a story behind Dig It and Stairs and Flowers that throughout the course of the year of 1986, I was lucky enough to work for Expo 86 in Vancouver, which was one of the greatest jobs I swear I ever had in my life. And basically they had a room that I could go to where I actually had gear set up, and I would be able to go there, and I had the 808 there. So I attribute that room to me being able to write Dig It and Stairs and Flowers and in the song composition mode. So if you know what I mean, when you write in the song composition mode, you can really get into a lot of detail and depth and, really good stuff. So I've kind of touched on One Time, One Place, but people always like to ask about God's Gift, Maggot. And that song was so pleasing. I have to say that writing that song in that room again, back in that apartment, as you saw, I mean, it's the first thing that comes to mind for me isn't Maggot, but I do remember the room being just like a hotbed of these ideas. So much came up, and basically, Maggot. I got to think it had to have disturbed the neighbors, because it's not a big room. It was basically a pretty small room, and there was something magical about. If you'll notice some artwork on the wall, it was and a portion control I Staggered Mentally poster. It was just that kind of room, and that was the room, of course, where Dwayne walked in, and I said the first thing we're going to do is antagonism. But first, let's talk about the next song on the list here, God's Gift. Again, that's a 727 and a 707 combination with the Pro 1. There's a magical bunch of samples being triggered by, again, that STD-1000 delay. And that created the ambience for the darkness of that track. The sample on there, again, very early samples in the Mirage, and that was about it. We went into Ocean Studios, I believe, in Vancouver, so it was a different studio. It was the one where we recorded the Tear Garden. And basically, that song was so unusual that we decided to track Ogre's vocals line by line. So we would we line it up, we'd run it and go, okay, we're ready to run the next line. And so there was some sort of I'll say percussive element to the next line. And I know that he was writing it line by line so that it would sound right and basically base on that concept. It was awesome. We did that with antagonism as well, where we recorded the first vocal line and then the third vocal line and then the fifth vocal line. And then he would go back in and record the second and so on, fill in the gaps. That way you could have tight-fitting vocals together, but without having Ogre being completely sort of out of breath enough to rip in there for the second one. It wasn't, long. I didn't really hang out in the vocal production area for long after this. This was I remember some of the last times that I was around for the vocal stuff. At that point, we found that it was kind of nice to be able to leave, and Rave and Ogre would work together on things and come back and kind of surprise us the next day with what had transpired, because the procedures for tracking things were definitely coming down to a really refined system, and it was also quite busy for us because we were preparing for the tour, as well as we were preparing to do albums and all sorts of things. So it became all of a sudden incredibly busy. So we laid down God's Gift, and that got done. Three Blind Mice and Love, actually, as I said, that's a backtrack. Loves comes from the very beginning, the same time as Film, and basically was kind of created mostly on Joe Visvari's setup in the Images in Vogue setup. So I'm going to say that was a Prophet 5 with a Lexicon PCM 41 and a Selena strings or Yamaha strings. I'm going to say a Pro 1 is involved in that. But most predominantly, again, the songs, were coming to life by the way of, how sometimes you can hear how something might fit. This girl from The Legend of Hell House. There's something about that Legend of Hell House. It's just like a hotbed of beautiful sounding tones and statements that really I could relate to. It's like you could put it together in such way as you could put together stuff from the Twilight Zone Elegy episode into, I believe, the Twilight Zone Elegy, I believe appears in, appears in more than one song. It appears in Dig It, Chainsaw, and 200 Years. So it's been paid tribute to prominently by us over the course of a couple of albums. Again, the Legend of Hell House in the Burnt with Water track, a fairly large section of good versus bad, Preacher versus The Exorcist, Linda Blair. I love how it's been dictated pretty clearly where these samples have come from over time. And again, if you go on to I believe it's Skinny Puppy in the European Euro.net or something to this effect. Please, someone post a link there. They have dictated where every sample pretty much has come from. And it's kind of cool. Like we can go through and see exactly there the Elegy, and 200 Years as well. So a lot of Elegy, a lot of The Exorcist, and a televangelist in Burnt with Water. Burnt with Water is another song that I had done pretty much almost completely, and then I said to Dwayne after he had done the sequence and antagonism, the first thing Dwayne did was the 16th note sequence, and right after that I said, that sounds so amazing, and I skipped up to Burnt with Water, which was tracked on the quarter-inch 8-track, and said, let's lay something down here. And he laid down the sequence using the sequencer in the Mirage, and that's what you hear. That's kind of like a flangey bass sequence that up into my life I had never heard anything like that before. And so I was like thinking, my God, this guy's so cool. I couldn't believe how well things were gelling. And quickly we started, okay, so we tracked Burnt with Water and I believe the full version of Antagonism the first day. As I said, we had already done Dig It. We'd already done 200 Years. 200 Years is a great story. Love, it goes, let's quickly go through the samples of the sources just before I get into 200 Years. Paying tribute to The Exorcist and being able to, well, at the time when we made the album, you didn't think about getting away with it. You just thought like, wow, hey, this is cool. This sample really works in this song. And you didn't think twice about whether or not, there wasn't any such thing as sample clearance yet. And what's funny is that I guess Skinny Puppy defies the laws of reality, because I believe, if you look at the copyright of things, this movie probably was made by a company with a copyright and was released then by Capitol Records. We were signed by Capitol Records to do Mine the Perpetual Intercourse, and we released a segment of The Exorcist on it. So somewhere down the road that has to get crazy, but respectfully, I thank people for not looking back too far and saying, hey, we have to have some wokeism on that. It really wasn't the case. But I really have to say, my favorite film of all time that, if you guys haven't gone back and watched, is either The Legend of Hell House Or another film that we took a lot of great samples from is The Haunting, the original version. Don't touch anything about the new version or any of these things that about it. It's just a classic old haunted house picture. It has an enormous amount of samples from us, and paying tribute to any sort of house that's haunted that looks like that. I mean, I'm sorry. I'll take it. So I think that there was a lot of things about paying tribute. We were avid movie watchers in these days, and I think that it was important to say that, you know, with a lot of the parties we always had movies running, and it was like part of the party. And sometimes it seemed like that they became part of the party, like Videodrome or The Thing, or, you know, any one of the movies that we're talking about. A lot of them became the reason why, I guess, why we'd end up utilizing them in further things. So as we moved forward and everything, I realized that at that point I was picking up guitar, and it's really kind of most featured in One Time, One Place. A lot of people ask, what are those crazy sounds, those distorted, crazy sounds? And it's that guitar. Let me see if I can do it. That guitar right here, this blonde one, which thankfully has been tuned up so eloquently by T-Dog Cole, one of our guests here on Sunday Live Chat a while back. Go check it out. The guy's an expert guitar person, guitar tech, has toured the world now. I believe he's just tuning guitars right now. He doesn't want to go out. But I took a file to that guitar across the bridges, and that is how a large part of those solos and sounds sound so disgustingly distorted. So I would use this with the heavy metal pedal, and I'd send it through that Ibanez D1000 delay, and that poor guitar does not want to even see this file right now. Don't worry, honey, he's not coming near you. So, dig it also. And one really funny thing is a lot of people ask about the middle of Dig It. Again, you know, it was like samples that we were able to take, and I remembered so perfectly synced today that this was the album that the samples came from. Yes, I could go to my record collection and say, wait, I'm pretty sure I know where those samples came from. The Gregorian Sure Choir from Santo Domingo de Silos. Let's give credit to them, because, you know, a lot of the samples sometimes don't get credited. But this is where it came from, and I kind of was just, I'll say, pulling an inspiration from Tom Ellard, who would pick any tape that had singing on it and try and apply it to the music with a various pitch or a pitch shifter on it, and it was really, really, really fun. So of course, when we spun it in Dig It, I mean, I couldn't kind of believe my mind, actually. At the first, I was like, boy, this works well, almost a little too well. It was a crazy experiment that worked, and again, almost as much as screwing it up with the distortion pedal. And it came out, of course, in a 12-inch form, and then it also came out in a European form, in a blue 12-inch form. And I believe this is on... this one has Dig It in the Choke, this one has Dig It the Choke and Film, and it says this one is Network, so I'll go with it. This one says Capital, Network Capital. I believe this might be the European version. It's certainly shinier, and it looks like a Euro price tag on it. Does it not? Yeah. They also released, as I said earlier, the Chainsaw record, and I believe the Chainsaw record was called Stairs and Flowers in America. So, I'll get a chainsaw in a second. Stairs and Flowers obviously had some transitional elements to it, and you'll notice that the version on the album is quite a bit different than the version that came later. When we were on tour, Capitol Records met up with us, Mr. Tom Wally, and he said, "What would you guys like to do?" And I said, "How's about a cool remix?" And Dwayne said, "Yeah, by Mantronics." And so we were in New York, and Tom didn't look too confused by that. So they called up Mantronics, and Chep Nunez and the boys basically cut up Stairs and Flowers into the version released in the 12-inch and also the video as we know it. Yes, that funky bass line was added by the one, the only Mantronics. And, that was a big experiment that we thought, like, we liked Mantronics. We certainly didn't know if other people would like Mantronics. At that time, it was kind of like hearing Mark Stewart and the Mafia. If you heard them at that time, you thought, like, what am I hearing? This is like future music. So we took a chance, and we made Stairs and Flowers and put a video to it. And it was kind of like, in the days when you spend a lot of money on a video still. And the guy, again, that would do a lot of the special effects in this was the guy that plays the chainsaw in Chainsaw. And again, his name is Dave Jackson. And I gotta say, Dave deserves a lot of credit for, all the stuff he would always be doing for us. Whether it would be being on tour with us, shooting Ogre each night on stage, or building the stage, or building the props, or perhaps you saw the tour 1986 where Dave hung Ogre several times, or all sorts of things. Dave passed away a couple years ago. Dave Hunter Jackson, great guy, was always involved. If you saw him, this is what he looked like setting up our stage or doing something. Dave Hunter Jackson. I believe he became part of the Illuminated Agrum Army as a band member. Yep. Love you, Dave. And as I said, Chainsaw on the tour, amongst other things. Of course, the album leads to a tour, and little did we know what type of tour it was going to lead to. I remember that on that day where I showed a little earlier, where Rave and I are looking at the album cover, that is the beginning of the tour, the very first moment. Dwayne and I prepare ourselves for a long adventure. And it started with a Canadian tour all the way across Canada. And then it flew over to Europe. And basically, there's the Canadian dates. With Severed Heads, you couldn't have a finer group of guys with you to tour. I remember this part being quite Canadian. Like, it was very nice. Wasn't too bad, it wasn't marked with too many things, except, again, we were forced to travel across the Rocky Mountains in winter. I don't know which band would decide to do that other than Skinny Puppy. And to play Quebec City and Montreal when there's like minus 20. But nevertheless, we did. And as I scanned the dates there, recollecting, I see Toronto. I remember the Toronto show at RPM was one of the most memorable in that I think Ogre pretty much almost killed himself by a giant metal prop that he was using. And we were also knowing that next we were on our way to Europe for an entire tour of the continent, including this show here, opening for, it was really the second band on the list for the Futurama '86 festival. And we find ourselves in Europe for the first time. It wasn't an easy trip. We didn't have hotels. We stayed on people's floors and that type of thing. Sometimes we did have some hotels. This is the poster from that big first show at the Sub Ballroom at UBC. And I believe this video of the entire show is online. Yes, we were young lads. I was 25. I believe Ogre and Dwayne 23 or 24. We, it was an eye-opening experience. And a lot of shows. This was my setup, integrating guitar. You can see the TR-606 here. Getty Images, weird. This top keyboard here is the Ensoniq Mirage. This is the Yamaha DX7 here. I've got the live drum kit here with the barrels and a Simmons pad triggering some samples there for Maggot. I also had a radio here and a 4-track player and a distortion pedal, the heavy metal pedal that, as you saw. I think I'm going the wrong way there. We played the Roxy Theater. That was our first show in LA here with the Severed Heads, 1986. We were also welcomed to the Capitol Tower by Capitol Records, and they were playing Skinny Puppy in the building, in the Muzak, which we were like, this can't even be happening. This is through Europe. This was our cast of characters: Al Nelson, Dave Ogilvy, our lovely European hosts, Lionel and Fabienne, Ogre, Dwayne, myself. In Europe, we toured with A. Grum as our opening act for the Mind, the Perpetual Intercourse tour. I remember it because it was, again, before the wall came down, and we played in Hungary, we played in Yugoslavia. Actually, we didn't play Yugoslavia this year, we played Hungary this year, Budapest, crossing the Iron Curtain to do that. And there's stories on other chats about that experience, but let's say it wasn't too easy and involved a lot of trading merchandise for guys holding machine guns. Also, it was the first time we ever got to experience a real coffee shop in Amsterdam. Being able to do that with Dwayne, I remember thinking to myself, and he said it, why don't we live here? And to this day, I don't understand. Why didn't we live there? Again, Dwayne, there's no denying it, the best hair in music. This gig here, I remember in Switzerland, was the place where, in the same venue, was the studio of Yellow. And so Dwayne was incredibly, he couldn't believe it. And he sat the entire day at the door of the Yellow studio, hoping that somebody would come there, and nobody did. So, it's a very memorable day for Dwayne. November 1986, World Tour. I believe this tour was also captured on video. It's one of the ones you see commonly on YouTube, 1986, live in Holland. You can really check out how small the setup was we traveled with on that one. Incredibly small, but incredibly gory. Not that gory. I mean, gory enough. I love the PCM 41 is back there, and it has the repeat switch on top for Ogre's vocal effects. You can see on top here, Dwayne has 2 of the SDD 1000 delays. I had the same thing. Dwayne here has an Ensoniq Mirage there, and I believe that was also an Ensoniq Mirage there, also with some pedals. I believe this is a Swedish poster, Sweden 1986. One memory I have of the Swedish show is I came out after the show and I walked out, and some very Swedish looking girl came up to me and said something to me, and I said, were you here tonight? And she goes, oh, yes, I was here. And I said, how was it? And she goes, oh, the band was horrible. I loved it. Yep, the setups were very, very, very nice and clean and simple, but still we decided to carry half a ton of metal. And that's what we looked like. We would order Indian food if we ever got the chance. And one time we ordered Indian food, and the promoter did not realize that Indian food in those days cost 20 Gilder. No, Deutschmarks. We were in Germany. This was at the Frankfurt venue backstage. And Botchkov is the venue's name. And we ordered an Indian meal that night that they won't soon forget. I believe the bill was several $100s. They were not too happy about that. But the tour was illuminating, to say the least. It was something that I don't know. It kind of grew us in a way that, obviously we came home and we're making more albums. That the story will continue here on the live chat as I'll pick up the next album. But The other things that I have to say are the radio, which I don't have a picture of. I wish I had a picture of it because my dad gave it to me, and it was a recording 8-track. But it also had an AM/FM tuner with an on-off switch. And I carried that thing on tour with us for years until it literally disintegrated. That thing played a very huge part in the sound of Skinny Puppy when we were doing anything. From the moment Dwayne walked in the room, it's almost as though Dwayne brought that on, the whole time brought that on. And you'll hear it all over, even Ain't It Dead Yet or any of the times of that period, the blasting radio. And it could be said that the radio could be in, if we were in Hungary, I blasted a radio broadcast that was in Hungarian, and afterwards the secret police came backstage and said, "Where did you get the sample to play? You weren't supposed to be doing that." Apparently it was a very political sample about the fear of the uprising of the 30-year anniversary of the Russian a revolution against Russia, against the Russian occupation of Hungary. And I thought, just this week, I thought, how ironic is that? Times change, and times travel so quickly that sometimes I find it hard to believe that how much time has passed so quickly. It doesn't make it easy for me to digest sometimes. But hey, go with the flow. And I'm going to take the questions here. I'm going to start with what's on our lovely Patreon page. Thanks, you guys. I'm going to go through these as best as I can. Thanks, everybody, for your comments, by the way. Adam, I grew up with the Capitol version. Holy crap, does the vinyl sound huge? There's no question there, Adam. Thanks. Chainsaw Change, I appreciate electronic music. Thank you. Self-reflecting pattern. Arvin, thank you for being excited. What were the biggest changes in your approach to songwriting with this album over Bites and Remission? You know, I remember that when Dwayne came along, as I showed you earlier, the MSQ 700 sync box was also a sequencer. And I remember that MIDI at that moment started taking its first role. So the most integral step forward is the advent of digital sampling with the Mirage and the advent of MIDI. Yes, it changed. Did the album change how you're approaching your live shows? Yes. Dwayne and I could take on musical components onto a greater level, which would free me up to be able to do more percussion and things that I did do at that point. I mean, up until that point, I did do a fair amount of the keyboards, and I'd continue to do the fair amount of the keyboards. But I also live noticed that any human element that I added could be seen as an element that could make it less boring. I mean, let's face it, it's kind of boring to watch two guys play keyboards. And we kind of felt that way from day one anyways. Do you have a favorite Dwayne moment where you knew he was the missing puppy puzzle piece? I just knew right as that jam, as soon as he walked in the room and I started playing the radio and my guitar, that I said to myself, wait, I have never done this. So it just was, it's the reason why Dig It. Well, no, I actually had done Dig It, so I guess that's a lie. I was lying. I had touched the guitar. I guess it's safe to say that by this point, I had met Al Nelson first. So I was developing my interest in guitar, and I was working with Al starting all the way from mid-1985 on the Flu. So without backstepping too much, I got to go into a Flu pass someday. That's why the guitar came into the thing, because Al Nelson challenged me and said, let's play instruments that you don't normally play. And so I did have that, but I never integrated it with Skinny Puppy. And I didn't want to integrate it in some sort of way that was typical anyways if I was going to integrate it. If I was going to do cheesy guitar shit, I'd do it with the Flu. And if I wasn't, I'd hopefully have the ability to tame myself enough to do it right for Skinny Puppy. But that was definitely a very important thing. Alex Graham, couple questions. Who came up with the album title? I am certain that Ogre came up with the album title, and I'm trying to remember the meaning. I remember I was quite semi-puzzled by it, and I still remain semi puzzled, but I like that. Sometimes I don't have to know, the deepest meaning. I believe that we're influenced all around by the internet. Well, we weren't then. We're influenced all around by things that we see, and whether that's positive or negative, it's an intercourse. It's an intercourse. Perpetual intercourse is, really referring to bombardment of elements, I believe, that could be applied ever more so today, I think. Diggett was remarkable for me for the use of stabbing static, strong percussive. What was this influenced? Diggett, Diggett was as I said, I had a lunchroom in the Expo '86 facility, and luckily I had my 808 there, and I basically just was able to go in and jam on it, and thought, like, I'm gonna make a track on this. Oh, look, I've been screen sharing all this time. Can you guys see that? That is the video. Stephen Gilmore in the video for Diggett. And this was done before Dwayne arrived. My thoughts on it are, I don't know if it was inspired particularly by anything or anybody. I believe that Rave tuned my guitar to a D, either that or an E. It's either a D or an E. I'm not a guitar player. I worked on guitar up to a certain point, and then I just said, forget this. I have my guitars and stuff. I probably haven't added guitar or played guitar in quite some time, but this is going past the story. Diggett, I felt a little bit more like the door was open and I was ready to explore it. So I was, as I said, playing things with files and stuff like that. And really it became, I guess, the highlight of the album, in the sense that it was our first single, and the video immediately created controversy. This background here that's playing, for some reason, Much Music, the Canadian music channel, decided that we were showing subliminal messages back there. Subliminal messages of snuff. Where would they get such a story? I have no clue. But the album was quickly banned, and I became quickly known as the Grave Digger. So it wasn't a bad thing, but like Diggett was, I guess, our most, door-opening single at that point. I'm not too sure if it because it was kind of semi-inspired by hip-hop, that it could be seen as how it maybe got integrated to the United States. Maybe easier. I mean, I remember at that time I received a demo tape from NWA. It was sent to me by the Capitol Records people, by Rachel Matthews. Hey, listen to this new group. I was like, this is incredible. Like, the production on the TR-808 on NWA's stuff was second to none, as was Mantronic's. So we knew we had something to keep up with. And I remember hearing that around that time and thinking, well, a drum machine like an 808 or a 707 could be used if you triggered samples with the kick and the snare, and to double up the kick and the snare sound. And this is something that Rave did and came up with, and he was really good at, especially like for compensating the latencies. And we could double sounds with fantastically huge, unusual other sounds. So that's why a 707 or an 808 sounds bigger. Finally, it sounds like Ogre popped in after the completed tracks are fully written. Well, that's how all Skinny Puppy has been composed. I mean, you'll notice even on Patreon that a lot of the songs can be almost completed before we would add vocals, in the sense of what the idea was. Because in those days, we had the pressure that we had to go into the studio. So, though it was important for him to come up with lyrical content, it was also important for us to basically come up with an arrangement before we went in. There was nothing worse than thinking about going into a studio and run through a few patterns of something and think that you could come up with a song that way quickly. Well, eventually we did. Deep Down Trauma Hounds is a song where I got an SP 505 and I thought like, oh, I'll use this, and went in and just by composing a pattern and then tracking it the right way with Rave, we could make a song of it. And of course, again, the Pro 1. So, I used to begin to think that drum machines are really important instruments. And I think drum machines are really important instruments to look at like all the time. I think if you go back and look at how important now the drum machine is in modern music, it's imperative to understand like that the beauty of like, I was so glad that with Images in Vogue I was able to get one of the TR-808s back there on day one of its release and be able to understand its complexities from not such like an overwhelming perspective. Because as time goes on, MIDI and integration of even DAWs weren't around yet. Everything, like you could just understand each thing at a time and then integrate more and more as you did. And you can kind of hear that with Skinny Puppy, because you hear primitive sampler, primitive SDD 1000 delay samples, distortion on the 808 kick, distortion on the drums. No plugins, there weren't plugins. Track it to 2-inch tape or quarter-inch tape or a Porta Studio. It basically, when I listen back now to the tapes that I've been going through recently, if you on Patreon, you know which tapes I'm talking about. I'm astounded by their ability to be a storage method for your ideas, not only for a week, but for 40 years. I mean, I'm going back and finding stuff that I'm getting pretty blown away by. Not only that, but the quality of it alone. I don't know if it's probably maybe adding to it or what, but pretty amazing time. And I will continue to expose you guys, and thank you for your support with that. Side question. I once played Dig It for a friend who wasn't a big fan of experimental music. He was like, Vampire Run DMC. Yes. I gotta have to say that, initially we were noticed it being played pretty heavily in dance clubs that were spinning it next to AC/DC and Beastie Boys. At that time, it wasn't unusual. And it did open the door for our other songs. The choke, the regrip on the B-side of Dig It it's just such a heavy song that at that time, if they started playing that song, that's when you started seeing like the wave of like interest sort of growing. Jeremy Sebastiano. I can't wait for this one. In my opinion, this is the first perfect Puppy album. First perfect. Everything about this one checks all the boxes: atmospheres, experimentation, and best drum sound of the early era albums. Plus, the subtle but not so subtle early hip-hop influence. Well, you said it. I mean, the elements, I guess, what's weird is that when you make an album like this, you don't really know what you're making until the end, because, as I said, when I met Dwayne was July the 15th. The album came out September 24th. I remember at the time they would say, what's the name of this song? How many songs per side? I need it for the album credits, before we were finished the album. So in many cases, we had to name the song before the album was done. Stairs and Flowers is one of those songs. Mark, I read somewhere that Stairs and Flowers was a surprise hit on hip-hop stations. I'd love to know more how that played out. Yeah, as I said, that was Mantronics, Tom Wally, Capitol Records, and I believe that did open the door for us as far as like ever furthering our exposure into the world at that time, which was a very confusing sort of world, because hip-hop and our form of industrial was kind of like meshing. You had the heaviness of Schoolie D or the heaviness of the Beastie Boys, for that fact. Milling around. We were touring commonly all at the same time. Larry Clanky. Awesome. Really looking forward to this. Couple questions right off the bat. Probably thinking more. The main sequence, one time, one place, sounds random. It isn't. It's actually, I believe, Omar and Eric can chime in here. I think I'm going to say a 24-note sequence. And then basically that is triggered by a 16-step 808 pattern over and over. So it will run in a matter that will be slightly different. And that's part of like the nuance of trying to understand how weird it is that that song works that way, is by playing with these things. Omar and Eric, I can't wait that you guys chime in about that. Forgive me for reading with my eyes bulging out. I bet you they are. I bet you I just look like a Wookiee. And the opera tape vocals in Chainsaw. Well, that's Tom Ellard. Again, the wonder of taking anything he could find, pitching it correctly, and then adding it to what we were working. Okay, let's go into the story of are we even sharing that screen? I don't even know. I'm lost. Anyways, the story of Chainsaw. We had done the tour. We had finished the Mime TPI tour, and then after it all, we decided, let's go back into the studio. Only this time we'll go back in with Tom. And we took an idea. It was like very, very, I believe it was a Dwayne idea at first, the original bass sequence. And Tom said, okay, come up with a melody, Mr. Music. So I went out and wrote the melody, and he came up with the operatic samples, and Dave Jackson did the chainsaw. But somehow that got added on to the end of what would be known as the Mime TPI era. But chainsaw, again, I gotta say, checking out Tom Ellard the other day on his Seance live stream, where he was like playing some of the old stuff. I don't know if you guys checked that out, but he's the master of tapes. And I really think tapes is something that, you know, used to be a really important part of music creation. Yes, back to the Patreon questions. Oh, yeah, we got a lot, it looks like. Oh, I'll try to get through these as best as I can, people. Ah, man, I'm so bummed, Airsick Grove says. I'm going to have to miss it. Wow! Okay, one, why does Mime TPI sound so much larger in sound than the previous releases? Maybe we're just getting better in the studio mixing, or we're getting better tracking. Did Dwayne becoming a member change the approach in which you created a track from scratch? We hadn't actually written a track from scratch yet. And that story will come more so in the albums to come. Because up until this point, and continuing, well, I will say that Chainsaw would be the first song that Dwayne would have started. So there you go. That is the answer. I forgot about that. So yeah, Chainsaw. Let's see. Will Calendar, God's Gift Maggot, such a huge track, has such a cool drum part centered around a reoccurring pattern. How did you approach writing the drum parts for this era? Well, being a drummer, it was lucky that I knew that I could take a pattern, and in this case, there is, I believe, a trio of 16ths. So 3 times 16, 48. 48 steps. That can turn around on itself 1 every 3 patterns. Now, the thing is that Justin figures this out very, very, very easily. And when it comes to playing it, I mean, it's kind of a trip, because like once you lock into the understanding of that formula, it's really fun to play. I used to just totally dig playing it. And then the middle, when it kicks into a regular 4/4 groove, when we were on tour on this tour, I especially remember in Europe that I believe this was a song where in Sweden they basically collapsed the stage. Just crazy amount of people jumping on the stage, collapsed the front of the stage. We could still play, luckily, because we were at just the back a bit, but the front, it was just awesome. When I think of God's Gift Maggot, I think of that. And that was in Gothenburg. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Will. Kay, great timing. Associate this album with the fall. Yes, it is, isn't it? I mean, what was sad is that we had the greatest job in the world, both Ogre and I, and we were working for Expo 86. And we unfortunately had to leave that job to go start that tour in September. And I remember we had to leave it was like a month early. And so we got to miss like the last month. And what was sad is that we actually had planned to put on Liebach at Expo 86 during that last time and couldn't get to it. That was a story that we touched upon with Myra Davies, who's also in the live chats here in the history. A really interesting story with a wonderful person. Let's see. What did you say about it? Sort of a side note. My favorite recording of the song is on Brap. I guess that's on drums. Yes, I have always played the live drums on God's Gift Maggot up until Justin came along in the reformation, and then Justin's played it. And then I will say that Dre also joins in with the most amazing Maggot maraca. He got made a Maggot maraca. I'm really hoping that we'll be able to see that Maggot maraca again, Dre. Let me check in on the side here, too. Yeah. Let's see. I can't do it at the same time. Okay. Alexander Downs. Funny story. I'll keep it short. Back when I first heard Skinny Puppy, I was about 15, and this happened to be about a decade ago. I didn't know a lot about your discography. My dad collected tons of your music back in the day, and I'd put it on my iPod. At the time, I only listened to Bites and Remission. Anyways, there was a horrible storm one night. We lost power. I couldn't sleep at all without a fan on in my room, so I laid awake and decided to put my dad's Skinny Puppy collection on shuffle. I eventually drifted to sleep, but I woke up absolutely horrified to hear the sound of a chainsaw blaring away in my speakers. I jumped up, screamed, and ran out of my room, only to realize that there actually wasn't a chainsaw, but it was your song. So thank you for scaring me. What a great story, Alex. Matthew Dash, who did the backing vocals on God's Gift? That's Ogre, and it's pitched, just pitched down H3000. How was it performing with Dwayne for the first time? It was at the Expo UBC 1986 show, which, somehow I loaned my videotape to DJ Mike World of that show because we had it, and he digitized it, and it's out there. It's out there in the world. You can see that show. I believe if you pump in the search 1986 UBC, it will come up. That's the first show that Dwayne did, and it was awesome. You used radios extensively in 86, resulting in some brilliant moments. Haven't already discovered. Could you explain how you had these set up? It was merely a radio that had the fastest on-off switch that you've ever seen. It was a recording 8-track radio with tuner. And it had a volume knob and a couple of things, EQ, and a toggle switch. But that toggle switch, it wasn't like it didn't wait a second. It was instant on. So that's what made it great for percussion. And absolutely amazing when to run into a bit of effects. So one of my favorite things I ever did, not the favorite thing I ever did, maybe, but I used to have this car stereo that, believe it or not, had a reverb in it. It got stolen from my car. It was quite a good brand. I can't remember what it was. And I used to like to tune the station like between stations, where it would be like just halfway in, a quarter of the way in between a classical or whatever, and run that reverb or delay on it. And that's what I would listen to all the time. It was beautiful. I mean, I actually love the radio as a source of an instrument, and I really would like to go back to it. I'm going to try and to see if I can find one like the old one. Let's see, where are we? Roland Zwaga. One question: do you agree that Antagonism is the scariest track you've ever written? Hell no. Antagonism, no. I'm going to say that God's Gift Maggot, Burnt with Water, is more scary. And I'm going to tell you the story of 200 Years. Okay, I did that song at the studio just before I met Dwayne. And I thought to myself, I think I'm going to take some mushrooms. And I took mushrooms, and I went in, and it's the only time I ever did that. And I went in and I tried to write. I mean, I had a portion of 200 Years written, but I tried to track it and lay it down so that it sounded right. But every time I laid down a part, I would just start like laughing, like this, I couldn't take it seriously. And so that song is mushroom proof. So I had to like keep on working on it until every sound in it sounded like it was okay. It wouldn't make me go ah, like. So that's a funny story about mushrooms. And so in a weird way, I think that makes it in some ways almost scarier. But I think songs like Draining Faces, even The Mourn for that matter, I'm going to say Circus Stance, or even like the very end of Too Dark Park. When we used to do sometimes the ending of the Too Dark Park show, I know I'm jumping ahead here. I will cover it when I get there as well. You know, it was scary. You sometimes got raised my hair on my arms. One of my favorite albums, says Paul Basanti. My only beef is it doesn't include the mix edit of Stairs and Flowers for the music video. Yes, that's because it came out after. We made that after the album was well out, and we were already well underway on tour with that. And that's why also Chainsaws After, is because that was made after as well. It's kind of like a before and after. Penelope Courtney. Hi, Penelope. This was the first SP album I listened to after hearing Burnt with Water on one of local college radio stations in '86. Was blown away. Went out that week and bought the cassette. Life-changing moment. You know, and what I like about it is it still stands up, and it was one of the funnest songs ever to play live. It's not such a song that I really don't know if we could play that song live again, but how would you like it? Would you guys like to hear that? Okay, Andrew, I remember reading that the vinyl version of Dig It had a different guitar track. No, untrue. Does the cassette release have the same version as the vinyl? Thanks. I believe that one version they put a shorter version and one version a longer version. Big ups to Yo-Yo Scrape. Big ups to Yo-Yo Scrape. Yo-Yo Scrape was written in that room using that heavy metal pedal, and that is the TR-808. So run an 808 through your heavy metal pedal and track it, because it'll sound like Yo-Yo Scrape. There's nothing like the sound of the cowbell going through those distortion pedals. Zach Nevland. Thanks, Zach. Would you go into detail about how you achieved the delayed bass line in God's Gift Maggot? I've always wanted to cover this song and never been able to figure out its note progression. Well, God, that's I know that I was running it through a delay, but it was a pretty straightforward triggered sequence that, as I said, it was a 3-part drum pattern. So it could change triggers on one of those 16-step patterns. But it regularly went bum, bum, ba-da-bum, bum, bum, ba-dum, bum, bum, ba-da-bum, bum, bum, ba-dum. It could vary slightly, but that was the arrangement about how the notes were triggered. And those were triggered by the triggers of a particular instrument being run out to the Pro 1, to the trig end, sequence recorded, record those notes in there. It would be like, if I'm not mistaken, almost every Skinny Puppy song is in D. D, D sharp, D sharp, D, D sharp, D sharp, I'm going to guess. And so, yeah, that's pretty much how that was done. And then there would have been a delay on it. In that case, it sounded like there was, a longer delay. So it wasn't like a tight, it was a longer delay. Also, how did you get the TR-707 in sound to sound so meaty and powerful? Again, use a sample underneath the TR-707 sound of another kick sound, but leave the 707 sound, and you will achieve such glory. Shannon Gump, what is the sample on the single edited Stairs and Flowers that sounds like someone saying Chewbacca? Does anybody know? Chewbacca, I'm trying to think. Chewbacca. Well, let's just put it this way. The song Stairs and Flowers features a lot of random radio. And again, that radio is getting turned on. the sample, hey, I just tripped down these damn stairs. It was a random radio show that was playing late at night, and somehow I stumbled across it completely randomly. And you know what was weird is that I tracked that live to tape. So when I tracked that radio, it was just a miracle that when I did it at that moment, when I turned it on at that moment, that those voices sounded. That's the one thing that I love about chance, is that chance sometimes blows my mind. Laying chance to the universe, I used to say, it's kind of like I almost felt like channeling some energy that it might be right. And so that when things turn on, they could be absolutely right. On the 1986 Mine TPI tour, when we reached Toronto, I think it was in Waterloo, we were playing, and I turned on the radio, and I could recognize that what I turned on was us, if you can imagine. And it was the choke. And we hadn't played the choke yet. So I thought, like, oh, this is going to be funny. So I started doing a dub mix of the choke. And I remember Ogre and Dwayne looking at me like, how the fuck are you doing that? Because we weren't running any of the sequences that were run the choke. And he was like, I could not figure out how. And he said, it's on the radio. And I think I left it long enough for the DJ to come on at the end and be like, oh, Skinny Puppy. It was so funny. But if there's a live recording of that gig, go and see and suss it out. There is an improvisation of the choke being improvised with the radio. Chewbacca, I wish I could tell you which one it is. I'm going to guess that it's not a sample of someone saying Chewbacca. It is a sample of someone from that radio. Yeah, for sure. Dylan, first off, thanks for doing this. Just wanted to know if this was the first record using the Mirage. Yes, it was. And what did you guys think of it? I was mind-boggled. You know, it's absolutely amazing. I will tell you guys I'm going to be doing an upcoming episode where I'm going to go into the original Skinny Puppy studio setup. And I'm going to show it to you because it's set up again. And I'm mind-boggled by it. I really have to say. It's going to be very interesting to show and basically, you know, how we made some of this stuff. The Mirage is in there, and it's amazing. Its 8-bit quality was a limitation at the time. Were you and Dwayne finding its ability to mangle, distort sound as useful and creative aspect of it? Absolutely. I mean, what was amazing is that how well Dwayne understood it. I know a lot of people would understand that the synth is programmed using hexadecimal system. So you had to kind of understand that concept before getting into it. And, you know, that was a little bit... I mean, once Dwayne showed it to me, I was like, oh, of course. But up to that point, you know, it was a little bit complicated. And I liked complication, but the one thing that was amazing is that Dwayne was so meticulous about his detail with being complicated that you learned a lot. I never learned so much from anybody than I learned from Dwayne. And what I loved is that Dwayne said to me the same. I've never learned so much from somebody because he said he learned conventionally and classically trained, and he said never unlearn what you did, how you learn, which is completely unconventionally. My dad had a piano and an organ upstairs, and I could hear my sister playing all the time, or my dad, and the organ had a drum machine in it, so it was miraculous that those things were there because I remember one of my first compositions was a cover of the 2001 Space Odyssey theme that Diodato used to do. It was also my first record I bought, the first 7-inch. Also Sprach Zarathustra by Diodato. And basically, that was the first cover that I did. And then I would sit at the piano and I would realize that I was playing octaves. I'd just go crazy playing octaves all day. And so that was great training, obviously. And I didn't realize that, you know, obviously I was training myself. I did go for lessons, but I don't know about you guys and a bunch of people that can relate, but there's nothing worse than when I went for drum lessons and the guy sits there in solos for the whole time. I found that to be incredibly uninspiring. The thing I learned most was from my friend that actually sat there and had me tap my feet to stuff, and that was immensely powerful. And also practicing with headphones on while you drum to your favorite albums. It's incredible to do that because you're learning to listen as well as you're learning to play. And so once you can integrate those two, you'll have the strength of being able to work within tempo and also work within the concepts of timing. And then from there, it's a matter of running into gifted people along the way that inspire you. For me, Joe Visvari, absolutely, Dwayne Gettle. Between those two guys there, you couldn't ask for two better, more inspiring people. Yeah, so Matt G, hi. Kevin, thank you for connecting with your fans on Patreon and answering our questions. Can you talk more about your process for determining what songs will be instrumental, driven by samples, or have Ogre's vocals? Yeah, sometimes, like, for instance, Burnt with Water has a section that's pretty clearly, works well with the tape voices and the mood it creates. But then I love how it kicks in with the vocal section. That was great, and I really think that when we started getting into production, when we could track a song from the 1/4 inch that was made in the apartment to the 2 inch with Dave Ogilvy in the studio, the things could grow so much bigger. Grow with ideas, grow with concepts, and laying down extra sounds and other things and guitars and stuff like that. So it was really important. A song like 200 Years, I mean, or Love for that matter. A lot of songs were really worked with tape voices, and I was really interested in tape voices as an instrument. As I said, a lot of times the tape voice is me. In One Time, One Place, you'll hear the voice go, one time, one place. Yeah, that's just me sped up. Or other things. I remember in One Time, One Place, at the time, everyone was really scared about Nicaragua and Central America and the Sandinistas. And there's a Spanish sample in the song. If anybody out there in the Spanish community has figured it out. It says, "Here and there the Yankee will die." And I was scared about that because it was a Sandinistas saying, "Watch out, you guys," it's kind of like a threat. So, of course, we had to put it in the song. But a lot of you don't know that. Yeah. Jeremy Dickens. Hey, Jeremy, love the record. The second puppy album I bought. I suspect you'll cover this when chatting about it. What? It's the second album you bought? But it seems like a pretty big stylistic jump from Bites. I'm guessing that, one thing I have to attribute what I love about Bites is that it was still dance club oriented. We still hung out at the Love Affair. We still went out every weekend and went to Faces nightclub and waited for them to play Liaisons Dangereuses. We still went out and hoped someone would play Fad Gadget. And then oddly, what was weird is that we'd heard them playing all our music. So it became a place where it was almost like, I won't say embarrassing, but it was like what we called hilt. It was hilt to be in the club when they're playing your songs. You can't be seen dancing to your own song. It was almost like go run and hide. And it's funny that, I used to feel that way. So maybe somewhere along the way, it became less focused on having to have it be late night thuddy and have it be something that was just sort of seeing where everything went. And that was kind of interesting. And absolutely, I can honestly say that with Skinny Puppy, because I was growing as a person myself, I wasn't, not experienced. I was only as experienced as I was at the moment. So in building experience, you grow in talent on everything that you do. And I had no idea how an album was going to turn out once I started it. I literally had no idea. I would just go with what came. And I still do that. I still will sit at all this gear here and I'll just be like, okay, well, what's going to come up? I won't be like, oh, I got to write something like this or that, as much as maybe some people would want. But, that's how life works, is why you work with stuff. It's like, it inspires you. You hear something about it. And I don't know. So I'm wondering if there's anything specific that jumps out at you to account to the shift. Well, as I said, yeah, changing times, different techniques, gear, sampling, the advent of MIDI, as I've said. Yeah. James Thomas Abbott. Hey, could you talk about the arrangement methods and most significantly the mixing process of the album? The arrangement methods were largely created because it was before the time of a DAW, were largely created with inside a song mode of the drum machine. So in the 808 or the 707, 727, get into recording song mode. And if that was being synced with Dwayne's MSQ 700, which was being implemented on Antagonism, then basically the arrangement would have to follow the arrangement of the drum machine. The arrangement of the drum machine dictated everything. It was kind of like how these days, how when people track albums, actually not just these days, all days, basically people always track the drums first. And they'll get the tightest drum performance they can with the most acceptable performance that it can be. And then they'll start tracking, and they'll do that with like the bassists and the guitars, lay it down and lay it down and lay it down, and then meticulously they go through these things, and then edit together the tightest performance, and then the bassists and guitars will go and then play to that tight performance, and then that's quite commonly how a lot of albums are recorded. Because we were laying down the drums first, we had to also follow a similar structure, lay down the drums and production of the drums, and as well as the Pro 1. The Pro 1 was being triggered by the drums, so that had to go down at the same time. So I remember that the first thing we always laid down was a performance of me sitting at the drum machine, sync to the Pro 1, and the Pro 1 is often going through an effect, and it would be like, are you ready? Be like, yeah, I'm ready. We'd lay down. I honestly cannot remember if we were able to lay down some form of sync. This is the weirdest thing. I keep on thinking in my mind that Rave had figured out some form of sync by the time we were doing this that enabled us to go back. But I could be wrong. And it could be through the MSQ 700, but I don't know the exact answer of this, because I remember this was before DAW, this was before MIDI. So I would hit start, we'd record the whole song, whether my performance on the MIDI was right and the tracking of all the drums was right would be judged by us, and then we'd move on. And that was always the first step. When it came to these songs, quite commonly, because it was all analog and there was no DAW and there was no memory, we had to finish a song usually the same day. Now, when we did Mind the Perpetual Intercourse, every one of these songs had to be finished in one night. So if we started it and recorded it and tracking it and everything, Ogre would come in by the time, say, 4 hours later, maybe 5, track the vocals, and then we would go into mixing. Yes, and you'd start mixing at around 3 or 4 in the morning, which I hated. I hated the fact that, you had to mix when you were tired. And I didn't stay tired for too long. We would memorize our moves. We would sit at the mixing console, Rave, myself, and Dwayne, commonly. I would be in a situation where I would be in front of the faders that would be on-off of the tape voices, on-off of, like, specific samples or drum sounds, and panning was always all of our jobs. We would sit there panning and making sure that the things were right, the volumes were right, everything was right. It was a hands-on thing. And quite commonly, we would be finished by 9 a.m. in the morning, and David Foster would come in. Yes, the David Foster. And he would be starting the next session and always be like one of the first people that hear our stuff. Often he would say, oh, it's great, or whatever. Be like, I never realized he was going to go on to be one of the biggest producers in the world. I can't say I like his music, though. Where were we here? Where are we, guys? Matt G, thank you for connecting. Okay, that's not it. Jeremy, we did that. James, you have the long question. We're on this. Okay. You mentioned before a lot of demo work from around this time was done in your room. What was your home studio setup like then? It was all the gear that I just talked about in that pretty scary looking room with the painted wall, and all of it for this album was made in that room. What were you using? The pad string and more traditional synth tones. It was either that Roland keyboard or the Mirage, as stated. The DX7, this was something, okay, so why there wasn't a DX7 at my place is because I believe Ogre had bought a DX7. And so Ogre had the DX7 and 909, which we had made a better part of the previous albums with. It was at his house. So I didn't have access to it as readily as I did. Ogre and I used to live at the same building at 1045 Harrow at that time. And then now I was living at 1288 Broughton, and so it was much further away. That explains that. I believe I did continue to use the DX7 Live. I believe I rented it, though. I believe Ogre sold his DX7 and TR909 shortly after that. He did not hang on to it, sadly. So the original 909, the track Skinny Puppy, is out there somewhere. I have one that I got right after. Is it right back there? And yeah, I think that, drum machines, I don't know if they all sound exactly the same. Could you talk about the process of working with Ogre to manipulate his voice? It was always the PCM 41 or the Lexicon Primetime delay. It was always a Eventide, the early black Eventide. It was called H900. And a combination of that, and I don't believe we were using distortion yet. I don't believe distortion on the voice came until, I'm going to say, Rabies. I'm going to say possibly with Al Jorgensen. Thanks for the questions. Charles, YBDIS, Yibidis? I just want to know, who found that radio show that features so heavily in Stairs and Flowers? As I said, completely random. Just turned it on with the tape rolling and hoped that something good would happen. We used to run the tape sometimes 3-4 times if nothing happened. And, it was just, as I said, magical. You actually found the original full recording a few years ago and listened to it while doing dishes. If I remember correctly, it's called Sticks or something like that. Very much a mashup of H.P. Lovecraft, Toby Hooper. Have I ever gone back to listen to it? I have never heard the original recording. Maybe we can be exposed to it by a link, or please share a link on the community page here on Patreon. Chris Vaughn, cannot wait. Jason Lupo, I'll be at work. Have a good day at work. Sylvain Turcotte, as you tell about Stairs and Flowers, can you talk about the video? It was made out at the BC Penitentiary before they tore it down. I think they converted it into apartments. As I said, Dave Jackson is visible in that video, smashing the bottle across Ogre's face and doing his typical thing he would do on stage. The director, Dermot Shane, and I believe Dermot Shane directed that video. I'm not too sure if Gary Blair Smith, was also involved in that. But Dermot Shane also made the Dig It video. And as well, I believe he was the one that made the Stairs and Flowers video. And it also featured M, the cat. Lisa loves cat. And it was also first appearance of Dwayne with Skinny Puppy. And I showed clips of it earlier in this chat. Tim Gross, hi. Was there a conscious decision to incorporate more hip-hop elements? Or just the zeitgeist? It could have been the zeitgeist and the fact that I had heard NWA. Maybe. It could have been that. I'd heard NWA and I was like, what the hell? And also I'd heard Schoolie D, which I was really liked at the time. But I can't say I was, at that time, no, it didn't happen until 87 '87 when I was in Toronto, when I moved to Toronto, and I was exposed with Chris Sheppard to an immense amount of hip hop and stuff that happened. Vancouver was not a hip hop city, not in any way. And at that moment when we made this album, there was, little hip hop left. Well, left. There wasn't anything existed yet, as far as I knew. The love affair still existed. People were still, partying, and it was still much the ancient Vancouver vibe. Expo came along and kind of changed Vancouver, which was sad because I thought Expo was one of the greatest things that ever happened. But of course, I had a job and I brought Test Department and Neubauten to play there. I thought, like, we were supposed to play there. I mean, it was like kind of a great opportunity, but the downside is it destroyed a vibe of the city after that was very obvious. And so we departed, and Dwayne and I decided to try out Toronto because of the hype that Chris Sheppard was generating with CFNY and the help that they gave us in establishing our career. CFNY FM and Chris Sheppard really was huge. So, of course, we began to be out there more often. As you see, what's to come with Ain't It Dead Yet. Massive support from people. So, after this, making this album and doing the tour, returning and making Chainsaw, what's really weird is that I have a really, really, really vivid memory of after the tour, after the 1986 Skinny Puppy European tour, when we worked with Egg Rum, that I saw the Steinberg Pro 24 Atari program on the Atari computer. And I was like, what is that? I must know what this is. And I was really glad to be exposed to that because you'd never seen anything like it yet in North America. So I investigated more and more and more what it was, and finally we ordered it. But what's weird is that I know we made Cleanseful to Manipulate between the time of doing the tour, coming back and doing Chainsaw, and receiving that computer. But what's weird is that, again, that seems like it just seems like a few months. So one thing that I note about the past is that we were moving so quickly, and we were always working, obviously, always making music, and it just seemed like 2 months or 3 months for us. Now everyone thinks, oh, I'll make an album in a year. Or, no, in 2 months or 3 months was probably what is equatable to a year now. We would do in 2 or 3 months. So it was crazy. I really had ourselves on quite a crazy schedule. Let me check live with you guys here on the comments. Thank you for joining in with me today. I hope you're still able to see me and hear me. I don't know how the stream's doing, but if it's doing good, I hope. Well, if you've got some questions, throw it in on the side here. I see Tom Ellard is a genius. He's absolutely correct. Is there a specific emotions that you associate with this album? From Pigeon. I really like the idea of how One Time One Place sets up the album and that sequence. It's not something that I feel that I've turned around and quickly done again, where I've got like uber geeks like Omar and Eric basically fathoming on how that was done, and simply it's just a synth. So basically, I guess it makes me feel good to know that my ear was in tune and doing some cool shit at the time. Wow, you guys are asking quite fast. Dash, hey, Jessica Kerr, are you Blue? Jessica Blue, by the way, Jessica? Is Jessica Blue? I got to tell you, she goes way back, don't you, Jessica? I doubt you'll see this after the epic slog through the Patreon, but I wonder if there's any standout moments in your memory from the U.S. tour. Was it possibly that you were there with your blue hair, standing outside the venue each day when it would be freezing cold and you would have maybe 4 or 5 hours to gain safety, but yet you would wait? Am I right with that? I could be right. Some people will say you have a very good memory, and I actually do. except for something you just told me. That's the fun thing about life, isn't it? Jeremy Dickens, I mean, just look at the release date of these albums. Yes, 86, I don't know, you know, that song was a very good year. Yeah, it's like that comes to mind when I think about 86. Kevin, do you recall when you played Antagonism live? We played it right on the first show that Dwayne joined there at UBC. And we played it for a better part of the tour, I'm pretty sure, on that. And was always fun. I think, you know, there's some songs that, like, they sound great and we'll play. And then as you get like 30 shows in or something, like, just sometimes, like, as a player, it doesn't become as inspiring. So that's why we'll take a song out of the set or not do it. It's just because sometimes they don't set up as well for maybe something like what Ogre might want to do, or the vibe, or even the fact that the chord changes or something, you know. Such a personal fave, Ogre singing. Yeah, I mean, as I said, we recorded each line of Ogre singing, every other line, and then went back and filled the holes. Jessica, it sounds like you might have been in a Collective Days by then. I guess you never realized how much of that year SB spent on tour. Oh no, I definitely remember how much of that year. 72 shows without going home. When I came home, that apartment that you saw had so much dust on it in spots that I realized, like, what the average dust, like how much dust can form in 4 months. You could definitely do an experiment. It was quite incredible. Hi, Rihanna.
Hello.
One thing about 1986 is that Rihanna was born.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi.
I didn't plan that. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, I met Rihanna after she was 25 years old. So don't go there. Question. From User Nooser. One time, one place, Three Blind Mice, 200 years, were drums sequenced on the TR-707's onboard sequencer. Correct, sir. No computer yet. Jessica, for me, it's Ogre with cake mashed over his head, muttering, "It's my birthday," at the show in my hometown. As I said, memories. We're talking 1986. It's only 37 years ago. Buying some prints off Steven very soon. Mondo, thank you. Mark, how did you all feel when you heard Down in It and figured it was a ripoff of Dig It? You know, I never really thought of Down on It as a ripoff of Dig It. I think people want to hear it in that. I mean, if he is inspired by it and that is a ripoff of it, then he should own up. Come on, Trent. You got the money. Kick down a donation to Subconscious or Skinny Puppy in general. Be fun. I mean, what's weird is that I've talked with almost every member of Nine Inch Nails since, on the live chats and since we did the tour, but Mr. Trent Reznor is silent. So Trent doesn't really speak to me or acknowledge Skinny Puppy to me in any way. So I wish he maybe would, but I don't care. And I don't care that the song was inspired by it. I wish him all the best, though. How did you... Oh, that was it. Jessica, yes. There are two versions of Dig It. One sounds heavier than the other with less of an intro. I believe that there's a 12-inch version and a regular album version. The album version would have been the one we mixed in one night. And the 12-inch version was when we went back in to make the single. And we were able to remix it. I'm trying to think if there was an edit to create the lengthy version. We did not re-record it or sequence it. So it could have been an edit or possibly... I believe it... I don't remember offhand whether it was an edit or how we did that, but it was a remix. Nick, did Twilight Zone Elegy inspire you to write 200 Years, or did you already start it? I knew that I had to use that sample. This is 200 years ahead of our time, because I kind of had that in mind, but that song made me feel like that was the right direction, like being kind of screwed up. Because at the time when I made 200 Years, it sounded really fucking different. If you consider like the Bon Jovi that was going on at the time, or the, all the rest of the music that was going on, you threw 200 Years on, you could like clear a room, or change somebody's life the wrong way. I mean, I was happy about that though. So I had to throw something in it that sort of like tuned into the confusion of what it was, and I thought that was really important. And plus that, I was on mushrooms, so and the only time I ever did mushrooms ever again to make music. I don't like recommend it. It had to pass the mushroom test, and that it seemed to be perfect for that too. I love Twilight Zone. I have always loved Twilight Zone. I used to write off in a book, in the official Twilight Zone book, if I'd seen them all, and go through them episode by episode, and was absolutely obsessed with them. And I still think Rod Serling and his mind was still one of the best, most creative minds Hollywood ever had. I mean, he is the original concept for Planet of the Apes, and all sorts of like. I know that came from a book, but like basically, he conceived like taking it to film. But I just really think that was a golden era, and I'm thankful that we were able to use samples in the way that we were without thinking about things in the way we did. I'm just thankful. Let's see here. I've been listening to Addiction. Well, that's on the next album. We'll get to Addiction on the next album, Cleanse, Fold, and Manipulate. Considering load times and setup time, how on stage during a show did you manage to keep them short? You mean load times of discs and stuff like that? That was a challenge, trust me. We would improvise, so that's why I had a 4-track player up there, that I could hit play on my 4-track player and it could play an assortment of noises and samples and stuff, or I could turn on the radio or something until like a disc loaded or something to that effect. But yeah, that was something that was part of life back then. Thanks, Ivan. Phenomenal. Yeah, 1986, I was University of Buffalo. Used to dial in CFNY at night. They got weird after midnight. Yeah, that's probably Chris Shepard. Then I heard Dig It. And went to Record Theater the very next day. Well, you see how important that initial inspiration is? You just need to hear something and your door's open and there you are. You're there. TR has mentioned that Down on It was a ripoff of Dig It. Yeah, I know. I did hear that, and let's hear it. Let's hear it. Let's have a source. I'd like to see it. Let's have a chat about it. I invite Trent Reznor to come have a chat with me. Trent, you in? You down on it? Somebody put the word out. Any chance you could get those Mine TPI shirts back in print? Always a chance. And we appreciate your suggestions when you guys really want something, like what it is that we should do. There's more merch coming as far as I've heard. I asked this further on, but I'll ask again. How did you compensate for the delay in the samples being triggered off the STD-1000? Good question. When using Roland drum machines to trigger it, Roland drum machine doesn't use an S-trig, and it's 1/4 inch, and it's a 1/4 inch in on the STD-1000 trig in. However, there was a delay, and how we did that was Ray figured it out, and I really got to say that it was by the use of another delay that could then delay the signal to make it at the right time. I actually, Rave is a master at how he figured out how to use a crossover to get the massive sounds, how he figured out the delay compensation in this year to have it be right on point. And since it's unfortunate, but I've gone into detail about this, how Rave has a thing about not speaking to me for now over 25 years. And I'm not going to go on record and say anything more than that's a shame. But like, those type of secrets will be posed to Rave. Rave could answer those questions better than anybody. Big up to Rave. All the biggest respect in the world to the guy. Let's see here. Any words about the track Love? Well, as I said, it was made at the Images in Vogue warehouse, and it was mostly played by hand by myself. And the samples were done basically utilizing the sampling delay, triggering the word love, 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 love. That's how the timing element was made. The samples were laid in by hand from just by recording, laying it in. But again, I was just absolutely taken with the sound of the voices in the movie. I think there's just something perfect about their tone. This just a great film as well. I love to pay tribute to a great film. And it's not that it's a fantastic film. What I love about it is its subtlety. And its subtlety of like not really being anything more than a haunted house story. But hey, when I was younger, the story of a haunted house was everything to me. I grew up loving Dark Shadows. I'd race home and watch Dark Shadows every day. I seriously thought that Jonathan Frid was my uncle. I tried to grow Quentin Collins sideburns. Some of you may be familiar with who I'm speaking about. Bevel Blade, you mentioned a soundtrack gig. Any news? Yes, I have currently been working on a score for a very big project that has an NDA, and I'm not allowed to say what it is. And it's not Skinny Puppy. It is a very big project indeed, and I'm very happy with the results, and I'm sure that you guys will too. More on that when it gets announced, which I've heard will not be till 2023. The good old improv between songs was always like, sometimes we would take that further and take it out into minutes. And some of those were some of my favorite parts of the show because, we would never prepare to those. And I love that. I mean, a lot of the Kill to Cure, that song Kill to Cure, that song was never written before the tour. That song was written during live jams. And so a lot of these songs that people ask, well, where's Kill to Cure? Well, it was only ever performed live as a jam. So they weren't intended to be recorded in that sense. And the Braps did, I'm trying to think if a Brap ever turned into a song. And I really can't, I guess Walking on Ice, because it got released as a track on its own, I guess people sometimes consider that a track. But again, Walking on Ice was just an improvisation. Live, again. Brap, yeah, Brap, the golden words. Brap meant to get together, hook up gear, smoke some weed, and record. It's just a quicker way to say it. And I am going to go on record in saying that marijuana is about the only user-friendly drug for the creation of Skinny Puppy. I think when we veered off and did any other drug during a session, it didn't lead to results with us finishing songs, mostly that I recall. You may be familiar with the Hilt B-side of Orange Pony, Explosions in My Head. Well, that whole recording obviously is under acid, and we were so devastated on acid that we couldn't even barely talk. So we were communicating with sound. And if you listen to the B-side of Orange Pony, knowing that, it makes it a much more enjoyable listening experience. So I'll throw that out there for you people. We had mescaline one time during the recording of Hearthstone White on Vivisect, and thankfully the song was recorded already, and it was Ogre's vocals that was being recorded, and I couldn't have done a thing that day. I don't recommend heavy drugs for the recording of music. I've not been much of a heavy drug person, to be quite honest with you. Very rarely have I strolled into the world where I've tried, say, cocaine or speed or crystal meth or heroin or peyote or mushrooms. I have experience trying all those things, but once I got in the door and looked around, I realized, get me back to weed. And when I did have a problem, which only lasted for maybe 2 months, smoking Chasing the Dragon, which everyone was doing in Vancouver at one point, which I found highly disturbing. I don't mean everyone as far as the rest of the guys in Skinny Puppy. I mean like the community was regularly going on, and I found that quite disturbing. And when I was at my worst, sort of like after a couple months, it was like realized that I had better get back to just appreciating what I have. And so weed has always been my modus ever since I've been 13 years old. So that gives me approximately 47 years of experience. And I got to say that if you don't need anything, then that's probably the best way. But I don't need weed. I just enjoy it. I enjoy the perspective. Still do. So I'll leave it at that. May I ask you a question? Holger? Yes, you can. From a Patreon schlump of death, who came after Sebastian Nouveau questions? Very interesting question. I'm lost. I don't know what you mean by that. Maybe you can repose it. The Korgs use an S-trig. No, 1/4 inch in. I don't want to haul it out of the rack up there and to show you, but I just will say that the cable hanging down from the wall is the trig in, and it's 1/4 inch. Right there. You see that cable? That's a cable going into STD 1000 up there. That's the trig cable. 1/4 inch. So you are incorrect, Mr. Black Agent. The atmospheres in that movie are top notch. Yes, I think you must be talking about Legend of Hell House. Now I own a kaiju farm. Yes, let's talk about that for a second. Paul Kaiju was just up here. Thank you, Paul. He presented me with... Now, these don't photograph nearly as well as they look in person. As a matter of fact, it kind of sucks. In person, it kind of has like this depth to it that you can't really explain. So this is the fisherman version. This is the one that has like a white face. And this is like a white face Boris, the only one in existence. Several of you Patreon people will have received your Paul Kaiju custom painted one by now, and I hope you're enjoying it. It's just laden with detail, and I'm happy to say that Simon, Paul, and I are extremely stoked about how that turned out. They are sold out at the moment, and there's going to be some chrome ones coming soon. If you're interested in a chrome one, like we had before that sold out in 4 minutes, hit me up. And don't forget, because they sell out way, way too fast. Let's see. Dark Shadows, wasn't it amazing? I gotta say, even the theme. I can listen to that theme and I can still get a bit of a hair raising. It's not that the show was very good. The show was horrible, actually. The werewolf on Dark Shadows was one of the best things about it. Smear the Guff, yes, Black Agent. Smear the Guff was also an improvisation from that tour. Any nice memories of Bill Lieb? Yeah, I have gone over a lot of Bill stuff in the previous chats. By this time, as I say, Bill had a firm grip on, wanting to do what he wanted to do. And it wasn't long before Bill had established himself as a solo artist. And I couldn't be happier for him. And what happened, meeting Reese and everything like that, Dwayne and I used to see him all the time. We'd talk about gear and all that stuff like that. There was a little bit of happy camaraderie, sort of, what do you call it? Competitiveness in some weird way. But it was not negative. It did get negative within other people in our camp. We used to say some really negative things about Frontline Assembly, but I just felt that would always come back to haunt you in the end. So basically, try to keep it good, and that's why I ended up working on Cyberactive and stuff like that with Bill. I've always remained a friend with Bill ever since day one, and Bill's always remained the same friend to me, which is very nice. So I guess that's a good story to share. Pot and tuning guitars cancel each other out. So I ended up a MIDI hoarder with headphones. That's a great comment, Bevel Blade. Pot and tuning guitars. I never really had too much of a problem tuning guitars with the great remote tuner that I used to have. That little thing, you get the light to go to the center. Beveled, seeing others go through stuff, I only do green. Don't think, yeah, I mean, personally, I can't even drink strong beer. I mean, if I have a beer, it can only be like lightweight beer, like Corona or something to that effect. If someone gives me an IP or IPA or whatever that is called, it just like nails me. And then I was with Gary Newman one night, and someone gave me 2 IPAs, and I got really drunk, and then I started picking Gary Newman up. I'm like hugging him. He didn't mind, but it was like, I never thought that I would get to that point. And then I realized, next day I said, I was hugging Gary Newman. It's like, let's hope he doesn't think that, well, he doesn't. Holger, you again. What a great chat. Thank you very much for the inside information I always wanted to know. Here's my question. First, do you think a remastered version would enhance the original recording? I do. And I will say that there has been discussions with Network about getting in and doing like remasters. The thing is that it's just always so complicated. Excuse me, I'm about to choke up a desert. It's always so complicated. Like, I wish if Network wanted to do that they would say, we don't need to sign a new contract. We just need to make some changes to our initial contract and make it better. And then have us understand what that says. Because whenever we get something where it'd be like, let's remaster stuff, we'll get presented with like a long, multiple paragraphs, multiple like legal jargon. And that's how we got in trouble to begin with. We got in trouble to begin with Network is because on page 18, paragraph 76 on clause number 64, we didn't read. And that's what got us into a lot of trouble with Network. That's why we are still with Network. I'm thankful that Network has been doing a reasonably good job as of late. I don't really want to throw them down, down the tube. I like to say positive stuff, and hopefully positive stuff will get worked out. But, let's say hi to Tiger Lily. Tiger Lily! There she is. The wondrous Tiger. Hi, Tigs. Tiger likes these chats. Yeah, we need to eat some food, she says. Tiger's getting bigger, everybody. Anybody that sees Tiger says, wow, she's such a little kitty. She really is. She's just a tiny cat. Isn't she cute? Tig, say hi. Here you go. Got to say something about the Gustave Doré stuff on the Dig It and Chainsaw. Really huge fan of how Stephen used it. I mean, the blue, just the way that it looks. Absolutely love the work that Stephen did as well on the Dig It sleeve. Some more Gustave Doré. It's nice to be associated with this design, with it. I noticed that a lot of people have tattoos and such. And with that, I would like to say that this has been the live chat talking about Mind the Perpetual Intercourse. And I thank you all, Patreon, for supporting such a venture. Without you, this would not happen. You wouldn't see this. You wouldn't hear it. And in some ways, I almost feel this is better than a book, writing a book, because I can actually sit here and respond to like life at real time instead of like writing down something and then thinking like, wait, I got another thought. And, you know, other than showing you the file for my guitar, I don't have much more to go on except I need to go get something to eat. So it's been a 2-hour chat. It's almost 4:20. You're 10 minutes away from the golden hour here, people. So get the green out. Have a nice Sunday wherever you're at. Eric Peterson, I see you chime in there. I want to hear the thing between you and Omar where you guys both remake One Time, One Place, just to see how close you can get it. We got to post that for people. And all the best to everybody for joining in on the chat and asking the questions. Arvin Holger, Jeremy, Pigeon User David, Beveled Blade, and all the rest of you guys. Thank you very much. We'll see you again soon.